private recovery center sat on the edge of the city, hidden behind rows of tall trees and iron gates. From the outside, it looked less like a hospital and more like a luxury resort. The building had polished glass walls, trimmed gardens, and a quietness that made every visitor lower their voice without even realizing it. Inside, everything ran with perfect order. Nurses walked quickly but carefully. Doctors spoke in short, measured sentences. Assistants kept their eyes on schedules and tablets. Every hallway smelled faintly of fresh flowers and expensive disinfectant. But beneath all that calm, there was something else. A tension no one openly discussed. It was the kind of tension that lived in silence. On her first morning there, the newest nurse noticed it almost immediately. Her name was Alira. She stood at the front desk holding a slim folder with her onboarding papers, watching as staff moved around her. She had worked in hospitals before, busy public wards, late-night emergency rooms, and even small-town clinics. But this place felt different. Too polished, too careful, and far too quiet. A senior nurse approached her with a practiced smile. Her name tag read V. Doran. "You're the new hire?" she asked. Alira nodded. "Follow me." The woman led her down a long corridor lined with framed artwork and floor-to-ceiling windows. Alira tried to make conversation, but every answer she got was short and formal. As they walked, they passed a group of staff gathered near a medication station. The moment they noticed V. Doran, their voices dropped. The moment they noticed Alira, they exchanged quick looks. Not rude, just knowing, as if they were silently asking how long she would last. By midday, Alira had already learned one thing. No one here spoke freely. Not in break rooms. Not in patient areas. Not even in the elevators. Every conversation seemed edited before it was spoken. And every time a certain name was mentioned, people grew even quieter. The CEO. No one said his full name unless necessary. Most simply called him Sir. By lunch, Alira finally asked, "What's the story with him?" She was sitting in the staff lounge with a tray of untouched food when one of the younger nurses looked up sharply. "Don't ask questions like that out loud." Alira blinked. "I was just curious." The nurse leaned closer and lowered her voice. "Everyone is curious. But around here, curiosity doesn't help." Before Alira could respond, the lounge door opened, and every person in the room stood up. A man in a tailored charcoal suit stepped inside. He wasn't elderly, but there was something about him that made him seem older than his years. Not in age, more in weight. The kind carried in the shoulders. His silver-streaked hair was neat, his posture straight, and his expression unreadable. He scanned the room once. No one spoke. No one moved. Alira remained seated for half a second too long before realizing everyone else was already standing. The man's eyes landed on her. The silence deepened. Then he simply turned and walked out. The room seemed to exhale all at once. Alira sat back down slowly. Was that him? No one answered. That afternoon, she learned his name from a file. Cauldron Vale, founder and chief executive of the entire medical network. Known for building one of the country's most elite rehabilitation programs. Also known, according to whispered hallway conversations, for being impossible to please. Demanding, cold, and deeply private. He wasn't technically a patient. But after a recent health complication, he had been staying in the executive recovery suite for several weeks. Which meant he was not only the man who ran the place, he was also living inside it. And everyone adjusted their behavior accordingly. By evening, Alira had almost forgotten about him. She was finishing paperwork at the nurse's station when V. Doran approached. "You're being reassigned." Alira looked up. "To where?" The older nurse hesitated, then said, "Executive Suite 7. Alira frowned. "I thought I was assigned to the West Wing." "You were. Then why the change?" V. Doran gave her a look that carried more warning than explanation. "He requested you." The hallway to Executive Suite 7 was different from the rest of the center. Thicker carpet, private lighting, no overhead announcements. Even the doors were spaced farther apart, giving each suite more privacy. As Alira approached the final room, she noticed two assistants outside, both standing unusually still. One of them opened the door without a word. Inside, the room was larger than some apartments. Soft lighting, a fireplace, shelves of books, and wide windows overlooking the gardens. At the center of it all sat Cauldron Vale. Not in a hospital bed. In an armchair, reading. A blanket rested over one leg. He did not look up immediately. Alira stepped inside and introduced herself. Still no response. Only after several seconds did he close the book and raise his eyes. "You're the new nurse." It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir." "I dislike that word." She paused. "Which one?" "Sir." Alira blinked. No one had prepared her for that answer. "What would you prefer?" "Nothing." She almost smiled, but stopped herself. "I was told you requested me." "I did." "May I ask why?" He studied her for a moment. "Because you were the only one who didn't look afraid." The honesty of it caught her off guard. She stood still, unsure whether that was praise or warning. Then he gestured toward the tray on the side table. "My medication." She moved to organize the evening doses. As she checked labels, she noticed one bottle placed out of order. The dosage was incorrect for the listed time. "Who prepared this?" He glanced over. "The night team." She held it up. "This shouldn't be here." His expression sharpened. "Explain." She pointed calmly. "The interaction risk with your earlier prescription. Taken together, it could cause serious dizziness and elevated blood pressure." He stared at her. For the first time, something shifted in his face. Not anger. Surprise. She set the bottle aside. "I'll correct it." He said nothing for several seconds. Then, quietly, "No one else noticed that." Alira finished preparing the proper medication and handed it to him with water. He took it without argument. A small but meaningful detail. As she checked his vitals, the silence between them changed. Less tense. More curious. Finally, he asked, "Where did you work before this?" "Public hospitals." "That's a long way from here." "Yes." "Why come?" She answered honestly. "Because I thought a place like this would care more about healing." He looked at her carefully. "And what do you think now?" She hesitated. Then said, "I think everyone here is very focused on pleasing one person." The room went still. Anyone else would have regretted speaking. But Cauldron Vale only leaned back slightly. "And that concerns you?" "It should concern you." A long pause followed. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. It wasn't loud, but it was real. Outside the suite, one of the assistants nearly dropped a clipboard. Inside, Alira stood frozen. He shook his head. "No one speaks to me that way." "Maybe that's the problem." Another silence. But this time it carried something different. Recognition. Before she left, he said, "Return tomorrow. I'm scheduled elsewhere." "Not anymore." When Alira stepped back into the hallway, both assistants stared at her. Doran arrived moments later, clearly expecting disaster. Instead, she found Alira calm and unharmed. "What happened in there?" Alira adjusted her clipboard. "He needs better medication review procedures." The older nurse stared. "That's what you have to say?" "For now." Word spread faster than anyone expected. By the next morning, staff were watching her with a mixture of disbelief and curiosity. No one knew exactly what had happened. Only that the CEO had personally requested her again. And that for the first time in years. He had smiled. Alira walked back toward Executive Suite 7, aware of every pair of eyes following her. She still didn't understand why he had chosen her, or what he really wanted. But she knew one thing. Behind the fear surrounding Cauldron Vale, there was something no one had dared to look at closely. And whatever it was, it had begun to surface the moment she stepped into that room. By the third morning, the entire center had adjusted to one uncomfortable truth. Alira was no longer just another nurse. She had become the one person the CEO asked for by name. And in a place where even department heads waited nervously outside his suite, that changed everything. No one said it directly, but the atmosphere around her had shifted. Some staff were polite in a way that felt forced. Others watched her as if expecting her to make a mistake at any moment. A few avoided her entirely. Alira noticed all of it. She also noticed something else. Cauldron Vale's mood seemed calmer when she was around. He still spoke in short, measured sentences. He still disliked unnecessary conversation. But the edge in his tone had softened. And every day he asked her one unexpected question. Not about medicine. About life. The first day he asked where she grew up. The second, why she became a nurse. The third, whether she believed people could change. That last question stayed with her. She had been adjusting the pillows behind his back when he asked it, as casually as if he were discussing the weather. Do you think people truly change? He said, looking toward the window. Or do they simply become more careful about what they reveal? Alira paused. She had learned not to rush her answers around him. Both happen, she said. He turned slightly. Which one do you believe in more? She considered the question. Real change, she replied. But only when someone is willing to face what they've avoided. He gave a faint nod, then said nothing more. But something in his expression lingered, like her answer had unsettled him. That afternoon, she entered his suite to find him standing alone by the bookshelf, without his cane. For a brief moment, she saw the strain in his posture before he quickly masked it. You shouldn't be standing without support yet, she said. He glanced at her. And you shouldn't be lecturing your employer. You're not my employer in here. That made him smirk. Then what am I? She walked over, steadying him gently by the arm. A patient who ignores medical advice. He allowed her to guide him back to the chair. It was a small moment, but for someone like him, it meant trust. And trust, she was learning, did not come easily to Cauldron Vale. Later that evening, she reviewed his updated treatment notes. That was when she found something unusual. A recommendation for increased stress medication, signed by one of the senior physicians. The dosage was aggressive and unnecessary. She checked the recent reports. His vitals had improved. His mobility was returning. There was no medical reason for the change. She brought the file to V. Doran. This adjustment doesn't make sense. The older nurse barely looked at it. Then don't question it. Alira frowned. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting. She lowered her voice. Someone is making treatment decisions based on convenience, not care. V. Doran finally met her eyes. And for the first time there was real fear in them. You need to understand where you are, she said quietly. Not every decision in this building is medical. Alira felt a chill. What does that mean? But V. Doran had already turned away. That night, she couldn't stop thinking about it. The next morning, she decided to ask Cauldron directly. He was reviewing emails on his tablet when she entered. She placed the file on the table. Why would someone increase your medication without clinical need? He read the note, expression unreadable. Then he set the tablet aside. Because if I recover too quickly, certain people lose influence. Alira stared. He said it so calmly that it took a moment to sink in. You know about this? Of course. Then why allow it? A bitter smile crossed his face. Because I wanted to see who would do it. She looked at him in disbelief. You tested your own staff? I observed them. That's not the same thing. He leaned back. No. Because while you were observing, they were risking your health. For the first time, her voice carried frustration. Real frustration. He studied her carefully, then said, and yet you are the only one who challenged it. That doesn't make it acceptable. The room grew still. She expected him to push back. Instead, he looked down at the file in his hand. You're right. The words were quiet, unexpected. She had not imagined he would say them. He placed the file aside. For years, I built this institution on discipline and efficiency. I believed if I demanded excellence, excellence would follow. He looked toward the window. But fear can imitate excellence for a very long time. Alira said nothing. Because beneath his usual control, she heard something she had not expected. Regret. That afternoon, something happened that no one in the center could ignore. During a routine executive briefing, Cauldron requested Alira remain in the room. No nurse had ever been asked to stay during internal meetings. Senior administrators entered one by one, visibly surprised to see her standing near his desk. One of them, a sharply dressed operations director, glanced at her with clear disapproval. "Should we reschedule?" Cauldron looked up. "No." The meeting continued. Financial reports, expansion plans, board concerns. Alira stood quietly, taking notes only when requested. But as the discussion shifted toward staffing cuts, she noticed the language being used. They spoke about nurses as numbers, patients as units, care as operational cost. And then one director suggested reducing overnight staff in lower-income branches. It would improve margins without noticeable impact. Alira felt something inside her tighten. Before she could stop herself, she spoke. It would absolutely have an impact. The room froze. Every eye turned toward her. The operations director looked stunned. "I'm sorry." Who invited commentary? Cauldron remained silent. Alira took a breath. Reducing overnight staff in underfunded branches increases response time, fatigue, and patient neglect. You may not notice it in reports, but the people there will. The director scoffed. "With respect, you're a nurse." "Yes," she said evenly. "Which means I've seen the consequences of decisions made in rooms like this." Silence. Heavy and uncomfortable. Then the director turned to Cauldron. "Are we seriously entertaining this?" Cauldron folded his hands and said, "Continue, nurse." The words landed like thunder. Alira explained what she had witnessed in public hospitals. The strain on caregivers, the emotional cost of understaffing, the long-term damage hidden behind short-term savings. She did not raise her voice. She did not dramatize. She simply told the truth. When she finished, the room was still. Then Cauldron looked at the board members. "Revise the proposal." The director protested. "Based on her opinion? Based on her experience," he replied. No one argued after that. When the meeting ended, the administrators left in silence. The operations director gave Alira a cold stare on the way out. She knew she had made an enemy, but that was not what stayed with her. It was the expression on Cauldron's face after the room emptied. He looked thoughtful, almost distant. "You embarrassed half my executive team," he said. She exhaled. I answered honestly. "Yes." He gave a faint smile. "That seems to be your specialty." She hesitated. "Why did you support me?" He was quiet for a long moment, then said, "Because for the first time in years, someone in that room spoke for people who are usually invisible." That evening, rumors spread through every department. The new nurse had challenged executives. The CEO had backed her. And somehow, against all expectation, she remained at his side. But as Alira returned to her quarters that night, she found an unsigned note slipped under her door. Just one sentence. "Be careful what truths you uncover." She read it twice, then looked down the empty hallway. For the first time since arriving, she realized this place was not only built on silence. It was built on secrets. And someone had just warned her that getting closer to the truth might come at a cost. The note stayed in Alira's pocket all through the next morning. She had read it so many times the fold in the paper had nearly torn. The handwriting was neat, careful, impossible to recognize. No signature, no clue, only a warning. Be careful what truths you uncover. She wanted to ignore it. She wanted to believe it was just someone trying to intimidate her. But deep down, she knew better. Because the longer she stayed inside the recovery center, the clearer it became that things were not as polished as they appeared. The silence in the halls was not professionalism. It was fear, and fear never exists without a reason. She entered Cauldron Vale's suite carrying his morning medication and found him already awake, seated near the window. Rain tapped softly against the glass. He was holding an old photograph. He tucked it away the moment he noticed her. That alone was unusual. He never hid anything unless it mattered. "You're distracted," he said. "So are you." A faint smile crossed his face. Fair enough. She handed him the medication and watched him carefully. You should be walking with support today. And you should stop acting like I enjoy being told what to do. Yet here we are. He took the pills and shook his head. You are impossible. I've heard worse. As he stood, she noticed his hand briefly grip the edge of the chair tighter than usual. Pain. He tried to hide it, but she saw. She always saw. Halfway through the short walk across the room, he stopped. Not because of weakness, because his breathing changed. His expression went distant. Alira moved closer. What is it? He didn't answer immediately. Then very quietly he said, This room is too quiet. She frowned. There was something in his tone she had never heard before. Not irritation. Not command. Something closer to exhaustion. He lowered himself back into the chair. For a moment, he looked less like a powerful executive and more like a man carrying years he could no longer manage alone. She sat across from him. Then tell me what's making it feel so loud. He looked at her. Really looked. As if deciding whether to open a door that had been locked for years. Then he asked, Have you ever lost someone because you waited too long to say what mattered? The question landed heavily. Alira hesitated. Yes. He turned his gaze back to the rain. So have I. He didn't explain further. But he didn't need to. The grief in his voice was enough. That afternoon, while reviewing older files in the administrative archive, Alira came across a restricted patient history linked to the executive suite. She had not meant to search for it. But one name caught her attention. A former patient admitted 8 years earlier under private care. Same suite. Same supervising physicians. Same restricted access. She clicked the file. Before she could read more, the system locked. Access denied. A message flashed on the screen. Unauthorized inquiry detected. She stepped back. Someone had flagged the record instantly. Within minutes, V. Doran appeared in the archive doorway. You need to stop. Alira turned. Who was that patient? The older nurse looked pale. Leave it alone. Someone sent me a warning note. A file is locked the second I open it. And now you're telling me to stop asking questions. V. Doran stepped closer. Because some truths don't heal people. They destroy what little peace remains. Alira searched her face. Is this about him? A long silence. Then finally V. Doran nodded. It's about the reason he became the man everyone fears. That evening, Alira returned to the suite carrying more than medication. She carried questions. Cauldron was reading, though she suspected he had not turned the page in some time. She placed the tray down and said gently, Who was in this room 8 years ago? The book in his hand froze. For several seconds he did not move. Then he closed it. Who told you to ask that? No one. A pause. That's not true. She reached into her pocket and placed the note on the table. His face changed the moment he saw it. Not anger. Recognition. He picked it up slowly. Where did you get this? Under my door. He stared at the paper, then let out a breath that sounded older than him. They should have stayed out of it. Out of what? He stood and walked toward the fireplace, his steps slower than usual. For the first time, she noticed not just physical weakness but emotional hesitation. Like every word ahead would cost him something. There was someone, he said quietly. Someone I should have listened to. He kept his back turned. She was not part of this world. She believed medicine should never be ruled by power, status, or money. Alira stayed silent. She challenged me often, told me I was building systems that forgot the human side of care. His voice thinned. I dismissed her. He looked into the empty fireplace. I told myself I was being practical. That emotion clouded judgment. A long pause followed. Then she became ill. Alira felt her chest tighten. She was admitted here, under the same doctors I trusted, the same leadership I defended. He turned toward her, and for the first time his control was gone. They followed protocol instead of listening to her. They treated reports, not symptoms. They silenced concerns because they believed status meant certainty. His jaw tightened. And I let it happen. The room fell still. She died in this suite, he said, the words barely above a whisper. Alira understood then. The photograph, the regret, the grief buried beneath his coldness. Everything. After that, he continued, I became harder, more demanding. I convinced myself that control would prevent failure. But it created fear. Yes, he did not deny it. He simply accepted it. And fear became the culture. Alira looked at him with a new understanding. Not as a feared executive. Not as a difficult patient. But as a man who built walls after losing the one person who told him the truth. Why tell me now? He met her gaze. Because you sound like her. The honesty in that sentence struck deeper than she expected. Before she could answer, someone knocked. An assistant entered. Sir. The board chair has arrived unexpectedly. Cauldron's face shifted back into its usual composure. Send them in. The assistant hesitated. She insists it's urgent. A sharply dressed woman entered before permission was fully given. Her presence changed the room instantly. Controlled, confident, and visibly irritated. She glanced at Alira, then at Cauldron. We need to discuss your recent decisions. Cauldron remained calm. Then discuss them. The woman crossed her arms. You are disrupting established structures. Reversing board-approved strategies. Empowering lower staff in executive matters. Her eyes flicked toward Alira again. Especially this one. Alira stood quietly. Cauldron's voice stayed even. She is not the issue. She absolutely is. Since her arrival, internal balance has shifted. Perhaps the balance was flawed. The woman's expression hardened. You are allowing sentiment to weaken leadership. For a moment, Alira expected him to retreat. To become the cold executive everyone described. Instead, he said, No. I am correcting what I ignored for too long. Silence. The board chair stepped closer. You are making decisions based on guilt. That word hung in the air. Guilt. It was the first time someone had spoken it aloud. Cauldron's face turned unreadable. Then he said, And you are afraid of what happens if the truth about this institution is fully examined. The woman went still. Alira felt the shift instantly. A hidden line had been crossed. The board chair lowered her voice. If you pursue this path, consequences will follow. Cauldron held her gaze. Then let them. She left without another word. The door shut, and the silence afterward was heavier than before. Alira turned to him. What truth is she afraid of? He looked toward the closed door, then back at her. The same one you've been circling since you arrived. He picked up the old photograph from the side table and handed it to her. It showed a smiling woman standing beside a younger Cauldron. She wore a nurse's badge. And on the bottom corner of the frame was a date. 8 years ago. Alira looked closer, then froze, because the surname on the badge matched the restricted patient file. And the handwriting on the warning note. The same careful strokes. She looked up. That's impossible. Cauldron's voice was steady. No. It means someone inside this building knows what happened, and has been waiting for the truth to surface. And suddenly, the warning note no longer felt like a threat. Felt like an invitation. The photograph stayed in Alira's hands long after Cauldron had fallen silent. She studied the woman's face, the warmth in her smile, the intelligence in her eyes, the quiet confidence in the way she stood. She did not look like someone who feared speaking the truth. She looked like someone who expected to be heard. And somehow that made everything heavier. What was her name? Alira asked. Cauldron's expression softened in a way she had never seen before. Leora. He said it like a memory he had protected for years. She was the only person who could challenge me without hesitation. She believed healthcare should be built on dignity, not hierarchy. He looked toward the window. I admired her for it. Then I ignored her when it mattered most. Alira lowered the photo. And now someone connected to her is still here. Yes. But why stay hidden? Cauldron's face grew thoughtful. Because fear can last longer than grief. The answer stayed with her. That night, Alira searched quietly. Not in the system this time. In people. She spoke to housekeeping staff, older nurses, administrative assistants, those who had been there for years but rarely asked for recognition. Most said little. But one elderly records clerk finally gave her something. There was another nurse close to Leora, the woman whispered. They trained together. She disappeared from public roles after the incident. Do you know where she is now? The clerk hesitated, then slid a folded paper across the desk. A department extension number. No name, just a location. Sublevel archives. The next afternoon, Alira followed it. The sublevel was rarely used except for storage and old records. The air was cooler there, quieter. At the far end of the hallway, behind a half-open office door, sat a woman organizing files. She looked older than Alira expected. Silver at the temples, sharp posture, steady hands. She did not look surprised when Alira entered. You found me. Alira stopped. You wrote the note. The woman nodded once. I did. Why? She set down the folder. Because someone had to decide whether you were asking questions for curiosity or for change. Alira stepped closer. Who are you? The woman held her gaze. I was Leora's closest colleague. A silence passed. She trusted me. And when she died, I stayed. To expose what happened? To survive it first. There was no self-pity in her tone. Only truth. She explained how Leora had raised concerns about unsafe protocols and executive favoritism within the center. She had pushed for reforms that would place patient care over institutional image. Some listened. Others felt threatened. When she became a patient herself, her treatment was rushed, overmanaged, and shaped more by reputation than need. Critical observations were dismissed. Records were altered. Questions were buried. And when she passed away, the official explanation protected the institution, not the truth. Alira felt anger rise in her chest. Why was no one held accountable? The woman looked away. Because the people involved were powerful. And because Cauldron himself, in his grief, chose silence. He knows now. Yes, but knowing is not enough. The woman reached into a locked drawer and removed a thin folder. These are original internal reports. Notes that were never included in the final case review. Alira opened it carefully. What she saw confirmed everything. Ignored symptoms. Altered recommendations. Deliberate omissions. And one signature appeared repeatedly. The board chair. The same woman who had confronted Cauldron. Alira closed the folder. She helped cover it up. She protected the institution's reputation, at the cost of truth. A bitter pause followed. Then the woman added, Leora believed systems only change when someone is willing to speak in the room where silence benefits the powerful. Alira understood what she meant. That evening, Cauldron reviewed the documents in his suite. His face remained controlled, but the stillness around him sharpened. These were hidden from me. Alira watched him. Not entirely. Some part of you knew. He said nothing, because he did know. At least enough to suspect. Enough to avoid looking deeper. Enough to let grief become distance. Finally, he placed the papers down. There's a quarterly leadership gathering tomorrow. Alira frowned. The company-wide one? Yes. He looked at her steadily. I want you there. She hesitated. That room is full of executives, investors, department heads, and people who have avoided accountability for years. His tone remained calm. Tomorrow that changes. The next evening, the grand conference hall was filled. Executives in tailored suits, senior medical staff, regional directors. The atmosphere was polished, formal, confident. At the center of the stage stood Cauldron Vale. For the first time since his recovery began, he appeared without visible assistance. There was a murmur in the room. He looked stronger, more focused. But beside him stood someone no one expected. Alira. The whispers began instantly. The board chair sat in the front row, her expression unreadable. Cauldron opened the gathering with standard updates. Growth reports, patient outcomes, future strategy. Then he paused, and the room quieted. There is one matter that has remained unspoken within this institution for far too long. The energy shifted. Years ago, this center failed one of its own. Not through lack of resources, but through arrogance, silence, and misplaced priorities. The board chair straightened. Several executives exchanged uneasy glances. Cauldron continued. I contributed to that failure. Not through action, but through inaction. The honesty of it unsettled the room. He looked toward Alira, then stepped back. She understood. This was the moment. The room expected a polished corporate message. Instead, a nurse stepped to the podium and spoke. She did not accuse. She did not dramatize. She spoke about care. About what happens when leadership values control over listening. When institutions prioritize image over human dignity. When those closest to patients are treated as invisible voices. She explained how fear silences truth. How silence becomes policy. How systems built on hierarchy eventually fail the very people they claim to serve. The hall remained still. Her words were not loud, but they carried, because they were real. Then she held up the original reports, documents once buried, and calmly explained how critical medical concerns had been removed from official records, how accountability had been redirected, how one woman's warnings had been dismissed, before and after her death. Gasps rippled through the room. The board chair stood. This is inappropriate. Alira met her gaze. No. What was inappropriate was allowing truth to be edited for convenience. Security shifted near the exits. Tension rose, but Cauldron stepped forward. And for the first time in front of the entire organization, he spoke with unmistakable clarity. She is correct. Silence. Absolute silence. The board chair's face hardened. You are destroying your own company. He looked directly at her. No. I am rebuilding it. The room seemed to hold its breath. Then he announced immediate independent review proceedings, leadership restructuring, and full transparency measures across all facilities. Several executives objected. He did not flinch. One by one, he named the policies that would change. Whistleblower protections. Clinical oversight led by active medical staff. Mandatory patient advocacy representation. And most importantly, shared leadership councils where nurses, caregivers, and frontline teams held equal strategic voice. The audience sat stunned. For the first time, power in the room was being redistributed. And it was happening publicly. The board chair attempted one final challenge. You're handing authority to sentiment. Cauldron answered without hesitation. No. I am finally giving authority to experience. He turned toward Alira, then addressed the room. This institution forgot that compassion is not weakness. It is the foundation of meaningful care. The applause began slowly, then spread. Not from executives. From staff, nurses, technicians, support workers, people who had spent years unheard. Many stood, some with tears in their eyes, because for the first time someone in power had admitted the truth, and someone outside power had been allowed to speak it. The board chair left before the event ended, but no one followed her, because the balance in the room had already shifted, and everyone knew it. For the first time, Cauldron Vale was not the most feared person in the building. He was simply a man standing beside the truth. And Alira, the nurse no one expected to matter, had changed the direction of an entire institution with one thing no policy could manufacture: courage. The days after the gathering did not feel like normal days inside the recovery center. Everything looked the same on the surface. Clean hallways, quiet staff movements, polished floors reflecting soft light. But something underneath had changed. People no longer walked as if they were afraid of being watched. They walked as if they were finally being heard. Alira noticed it first in small things. A nurse correcting a senior without lowering her voice. A technician asking a question during rounds instead of staying silent. A junior staff member reporting an issue directly instead of whispering it later in private. The silence that once ruled the building had begun to break. And with it, something else began to rise. Confidence. It did not happen instantly, but it was steady, real. Cauldron Vale watched it all without interruption. For years, he had been the center of every decision in the institution. Now he observed more than he controlled. Meetings that once required his final approval were being handled by shared committees. Staff from different levels were sitting together at the same table for the first time. And Alira was often present, not as a guest, but as a voice. Not the only voice, just one among many. That alone was a change no one had ever imagined inside these walls. Still, not everyone welcomed it. Some executives quietly resigned. Others attempted to resist the restructuring from within. A few tried to return to old habits, giving orders instead of listening. But the structure no longer allowed it. The system was being rebuilt in real time. One morning, Alira entered Cauldron's suite expecting a routine check. Instead, she found him standing near the window, holding a letter. He was not reading it. He was simply holding it. "You've been quiet today," she said gently. He did not turn. "I received confirmation from the board." She stepped closer. "About the changes?" "Yes." A pause. "And they approved everything." That should have sounded like victory. But his tone was different. Not celebratory. Reflective. Alira noticed it immediately. "Is that not what you wanted?" He finally turned toward her. "That is what I believed I wanted." She studied him carefully. "And now?" He looked down at the letter. "Now I understand the cost of what I ignored for so long." The words were simple, but they carried weight. Because change, she had learned, always came with reflection. And reflection was rarely comfortable. Later that day, Cauldron requested a private meeting with the Leadership Council. Not in the executive room. Not behind closed doors. In the main conference hall. The same hall where the truth had been revealed. The room filled quickly. But the atmosphere was different now. Less fear. More attention. Cauldron stood at the front without notes. Without preparation. Just presence. "I built this institution believing that control would prevent failure," he began. His voice was steady. "But I was wrong." No one interrupted. "I believed that if I set the highest standards, everything beneath them would align." He paused. "But I forgot that systems do not fail because people are weak. They fail because people are unheard." Alira stood among the council members, listening. She had heard versions of this before, but this felt final. Not rehearsed. Not strategic. Honest. Cauldron continued. "For years, decisions here were made at the top and enforced downward. That created efficiency, but it also created silence." He looked across the room. "And silence allowed harm to go unnoticed." A long pause followed. Then he added something that surprised even Alira. "This institution does not need to fear me anymore." Murmurs spread quietly. "I do not want to be the center of it. I want it to function without fear of authority." He looked directly at the group. "That includes fear of me." The room felt heavier for a moment, then softer, because what he was offering was not control. It was release. After the meeting, Alira found him alone in the garden area behind the building. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the pathway. He was sitting on a bench, no documents in hand, no assistants nearby, just quiet. She approached slowly. "You didn't mention your health," she said. A faint smile touched his face. "Not everything needs to be part of a report." She sat beside him. For a while, neither of them spoke. The air felt different now, less tense than before, but more emotional. Finally, she asked, "Do you regret it?" He understood what she meant. Not the reforms, not the exposure, but everything that led to it. He took a long breath. "I regret that I waited so long to listen." Alira nodded slowly. "And Leora?" His expression changed. Not with sadness alone, with depth. "I think she would have been angry with me for a long time," he said quietly. "But I also think she would have expected this outcome." He looked toward the trees. She always believed people could correct themselves, even when they refused to believe it first. Alira watched him carefully. "Do you believe that now?" A pause. Then, honestly, he said, I want to. That answer mattered more than certainty, because certainty, she had learned, often closed doors. Hope kept them open. Weeks passed. The recovery center transformed in visible and invisible ways. Patient care protocols became more transparent. Staff meetings were open across levels. Feedback was not just collected, it was acted upon. Alira no longer felt like an outsider. She was part of the structure now. Not above it. Not below it. Inside it. One afternoon, she received a letter of her own. It was not a warning this time. It was an offer. A proposal from the new Internal Council Leadership Committee to become part of the Permanent Patient Advocacy and Clinical Review Board. She read it twice, then walked to Cauldron's office. He was packing away personal items from his desk. Not many. He had never kept much there. I think you already know why I'm here, she said. He looked at the letter in her hand. I do. She placed it on the desk. They want me to stay. He nodded. And you're unsure? It wasn't a question. She hesitated. I didn't come here to become part of leadership. No, he agreed. You came here to challenge it. A faint silence followed. Then he added, and because of that, it changed. Alira looked down at the letter again. I'm not sure I belong in that kind of role. Cauldron leaned back slightly. Belonging is not something you wait for, he said. It is something you build. She met his eyes. And you? He smiled faintly. I will not be here much longer. That caught her off guard. You're leaving. Stepping back. He corrected gently. The institution does not need me at its center anymore. She tried to process that. After everything he had built, after everything he had lost, he continued, it needs people like you at its center. She looked at him for a long moment, not as a CEO, not as a patient, but as a man who had finally decided to let go of control without letting go of responsibility. What will you do? He looked toward the window. I will make sure what we started does not return to what it was. A pause. And I will learn how to live without shaping everything around me. That sounded harder than any business decision he had ever made. Alira understood that. Over the following days, he slowly withdrew from daily operations. He attended fewer meetings. He delegated more decisions. He allowed others to lead without stepping in. At first, people hesitated. Then they adjusted. And finally, they grew into it. The center did not collapse without him. It stabilized, then improved, and something unexpected happened. Felt lighter. One evening, Alira found Cauldron outside near the entrance gate. He was standing alone, looking at the building. The place he had once controlled entirely, now functioning without needing his constant presence. She walked up beside him. It's strange, isn't it? She said. He nodded. Yes. Does it feel like loss? He thought about it. No, he said finally. It feels like completion. She looked at him. He was no longer the man who ruled every detail. He was something quieter, something more human, as if the weight he had carried for years had finally been set down. Before she left, he said, You changed more than this institution. She shook her head slightly. I only spoke. That was enough. A pause. Then he added, Leora would have liked you. That was the closest he had come to a farewell. Alira did not answer immediately, because some truths did not need response. Only acknowledgement. Months later, the center was no longer known for fear or silence. It was known for transparency, for collaboration, for listening. Alira stood in one of the training rooms, guiding new staff through patient advocacy principles. Not as someone above them, but beside them, and somewhere in the quiet transformation of the place, the echo of what once was still existed. Not as control, but as memory. And from that memory something better had been built. Not perfect, not complete, but real. And for the first time in a long time that was enough.